call this meeting to order in just a moment. Bear with me. All right, well, good evening. My name is Conrad Starr, Board President of the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council and the Transportation Committee Chair. I'm calling this special meeting to order at 5:31 p.m. This is a special joint meeting of the committee and the board, which allows more board participation, which otherwise would be restricted to just 6 board members under the Ralph M. Brown Act. Jeffrey, is my audio coming through okay?
It is to me. Well,
okay, good. Thank you.
Am I muted? I guess.
Oh, no, you're fine. We're hearing you.
Okay.
Great. So I'll just let you all know tonight's meeting is a rescheduled meeting that was previously announced for 5 p.m. last Wednesday, April 14th. The topic of tonight's meeting is the Los Angeles Department of Transportation's Stress-Free Connections project, which does include 3 planned intersections in our area. And those are Beverly and St. Andrews, 4th Street and Rossmore, and 4th Street and Highland. Tonight, we are joined by David Summers, who is the Supervising Transportation Planner 1 of Transportation Planning and Policy at DOT, Rubina Ghazarian, Supervising Transportation Planner 2 in that same department, as well as Severin Martinez, who is the Stress-Free Connections Project Manager at DOT. They will present on the project, and they will then discuss both the project and the surveys that have been circulated and take your questions. So we will invite community members as well as our board and committee members to ask those questions. Again, this meeting is being recorded and we will place it on YouTube for review. So if you know someone who is not able to attend, we would hope that you would share that link with them. That will be linked from our website at greaterwilshire.org. So at this point, I would ask our Transportation Committee Secretary, Jeff Carpenter, to please call the committee roll.
Is Jonah Briss present?
Jonah present. Aye.
Oh, I see you down there. Thank you, Jonah. Tucker Carney.
Tucker is present.
Thank you, Tucker. Jeff Carpenter is present. Cindy Schvaudel. I don't hear Cindy. Jennifer DeVore.
And Jeff, I'll remind you, Jennifer did resign from the committee previously.
Oh, that's right. We do have to take a couple off. Philip Farha. Philip? I see you there.
Present, Philip Farha.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Conrad Starr.
Conrad Starr present.
And John Venn. I'm not hearing John.
I see his name. I think he's waiting for you to pronounce it Vane.
Oh, I did that again, didn't I? Vane. All right, John, I'm sorry.
No worries. I've sort of got one foot in and one foot out. I had a conflict, but I figured I'd try to log in. So, but I'm here for at least for a bit.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
I think meeting's yours, Conrad.
Okay, thank you. So noting that 6 are present, and as you may have heard us mention, Chris Palencia has resigned from the committee as he is no longer a GWNC stakeholder. Our quorum is 4, so we have 6. So that's great. So tonight I'm going to encourage our presenters to move swiftly through the presentation, which will allow for more Q&A. And I'm going to cut them off at 6 o'clock, regardless of whether the presentation is still going on, because we do want to give 30 minutes to Q&A. We will ask everyone to raise their hands. So please save your questions for that Q&A portion. We may take a few questions at a time and then ask the presenters to go through those. And back to raising your hands, you will either use the raise hands button in your Zoom app, or you will dial *9 if you're dialing in from a phone. You will then be recognized when it's your turn to speak. And while the agenda does say that we will give board and committee members 2 minutes and members of the public 1 minute, I'd like to ask everyone to try and keep it to a maximum of 1 minute and 2 questions. Once you've made your question or comment, you'll be muted again. And I think that is good. So let me allow screen sharing by our guests. Let's see. Okay, so all panelists should be able to share. Who's starting us out tonight? Is that Severin?
That's myself, Conrad. This is David.
All right, David. Well, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And can you all see the presentation slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, first off, I'd like to thank the board and the board president for inviting us to present to the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council about the Planning for Stress-Free Connections project. Planning for Stress-Free Connections is a planning project with the scope to identify solutions to complete stress-free networks connections along our neighborhood streets to make it safer for bicycling, walking, and rolling. We think this is an important time to present to the board as we are now at a stage in our planning process where we have set our lens of where we need to solve for critical barriers, though early enough before we have, so that we have not made any recommendations of specific solutions. So just very briefly mentioned us, but I'll just introduce our project team. Myself speaking is David Summers. I am also a project lead on this, delivering on this program. Also presenting will be Severin Martinez, who's the day-to-day project lead on our team, and then my supervisor and manager of the Transportation Planning and Policy Division, Rubina Ghazarian. And so, you know, one thing just to take note is that we all work in the Transportation Planning and Policy Division at LADOT, and the reason why this project falls under our purview is that it is a planning project and there's no implementation funds have yet been identified or specific solutions or treatments have been identified. So we're still at a really big picture project lens, and I'll get into the background on what we started out. Oh wait, did I go? Oh yes, I did want to just read off. I always like to start out, not always aware of who's in the room in terms of what they're interfacing with the city. So I just wanted to show LADOT's vision and mission statement. At Los Angeles Department of Transportation, our vision is that all people have access to safe and affordable transportation choices that treat everyone with dignity and support vibrant, inclusive communities. And the mission is to lead transportation planning, project delivery, and operations in the city of Los Angeles, where we work together and collaborate to deliver a safe, livable, and well-run transportation system in the city and region. So now to project background. The impetus of this planning project begins with the city's mobility plan, which is the element of the city's general plan that most closely directs LADOT's work program and priorities. The mobility plan is a visionary document that includes several overarching goals that guide the city's policy and investment decisions. They include prioritizing safety first in the design and management of the transportation system, building a world-class infrastructure that includes, an example of that is providing safe, convenient, and comfortable local and regional bicycle facilities with people of all types and abilities, providing access for all Angelenos, no matter where they want to go and how, collaborate with communities to provide informed choices, and promote clean environments and healthy communities. Also, we should mention the Green New Deal is an executive director by Mayor Eric Garcetti that further defines LADOT work program priorities. In it, the mayor calls to make LA a global model of a carbon neutral city, with a zero carbon transportation system as one of the 5 zeros of climate action. It specifies the direction to complete active transportation corridors. The directive calls to complete 1 neighborhood network corridor per year. And the Green New Deal directly builds on and aligns with the goals of the Mobility Plan 2035 to provide access for all Angelenos to zero carbon transportation networks. So an example of how the mobility plan is implemented in DOT, take the safety first goal. DOT implements that through our Vision Zero program, where LADOT designs safe solutions for city arterial streets that contain the greatest preponderance of collisions. But just as important is other goals in the mobility plan, access for all Angelenos, and that world-class infrastructure is providing for safe travel options so that people can bike and walk more than they do today. So this is about attracting more people to biking and walking than currently exists. Providing access for all is not exclusively focused on people that walk and bike today, but make our streets more attractive for people so that a larger share of the population feel that biking and walking are more viable, attractive, safe, and convenient option. The Mobility Plan 2035 defines network of neighborhood streets, the neighborhood enhanced network that's shown here in the image in the green lines, as streets that provide comfortable and safe routes to travel by people that bike, walk, and roll. This network complements the bicycle network on arterial streets. Neighborhood networks that should be well connected to provide access for people of all ages and abilities. These types of networks can also improve public health, produce more equitable outcomes for Angelenos, and help to address our climate crisis. So we have the plan, and where do we begin? Now, the city is a big area, and we need to set priorities in building out this network. To do so, LADOT applied and was awarded a state planning grant to inform how the city prioritizes infrastructure investments to support the build out of a network of comfortable residential streets for people that bike and walk. The grant objectives include identifying areas with the potential to increase biking and walking, collaborate with communities to identify barriers to walking and biking, and validate our travel stress mapping efforts, and identify solutions to expand low stress networks in the central city subregion, along with corridors identified in the city's mobility plan neighborhood enhanced network. Now, I just mentioned the planning area, the central city subregion. The first part of this exercise is to identify areas in the city that are the most potential for making bicycling and walking more attractive options. Places that are conducive to getting around by biking and walking are places where a lot of people live, close to where a lot of people just want to go. And in our grant application, we set our scopes on the central city subregion, a geographic unit that's used to distribute metro funds. It spans from Pico Robertson on the west to Boyle Heights on the east, from Hollywood to the north and northeast LA, and Watts all the way to Watts to the south. And includes 2 million residents in the highest population densities west of the Mississippi River, the highest concentration of jobs and services in LA County, and a high propensity to support car-free travel. Now, the central city subregion is still a big region, and so we need to refine our lens further to consider where we'll find our greatest success in completing network connections based on where people will be most willing to walk and bike more if it were safe and comfortable to do so from start to end of their trip. We call those neighborhoods with the highest latent demand for biking and walking. The concept of latent demand means that more people could and may desire to walk and bike, but more than they do today, but don't necessarily feel safe and comfortable to make it a desirable way of getting around. We used multiple modeling data sources to identify high latent demand neighborhoods. We first estimated where bicycling and walking are already occurring in higher rates by relying on our travel demand forecasting model, which is our tool to forecast travel in Los Angeles. And then we accessed data to predict where bicycling and walking are likely to happen more. We went back to our travel model, travel demand forecasting model, to identify neighborhoods where trips are short and with a comfortable range for people that can bike and walk. We also used a gravity model based on land use data where the destinations are strongly associated by trips within a comfortable distance. And we combined and overlaid all four model outcomes to identify neighborhoods that were strongly predicted to support more journeys without the need of a car. And by focusing on neighborhoods, we can understand where we can begin completing critical neighborhood network connections to support the most people in getting around while experiencing lower stress. But this means that we need to build connections where it matters. We next examine in relation to those areas where there is the greatest need to provide a safe network of stress-free travel. We see that the networks are entirely lacking in the central area and encompasses Hollywood and the greater Wilshire neighborhoods. If we are to be successful in growing a zero carbon stress-free way of getting around, we need to provide a safe and comfortable networks in areas that would be attractive to people that are more risk adverse and people that are less confident in bicycling on busy streets, including women, children, and the aging population. And to do this, we then had to look at our streets, the residential streets themselves, to understand the existing barriers to travel on these streets so that they can function more as a network where people are less comfortable bicycling on arterials. And again, including women, children, and the aging population can ride in comfort. And the next part of the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Severin Martinez to discuss how we understand barriers to riding in comfort in a method we refer to as measuring the level of travel stress.
Thanks, David. Let's jump to the next slide. All right. So as part of this project, we aren't necessarily reinventing the wheel. We're drawing on existing research pioneered by the Mineta Institute in San Jose that studied level of travel stress. And some of the findings from this project showed that people measure how stressful a journey is by its weakest link. And that's important because if we go back to the previous slide.
Sorry, Severin. We're just had right there. We are.
Right. So measuring by the weakest link is important because, as we see, if we go to the next slide, that national research shows that there's a lot of people that are interested in walking and biking more often, but the primary reason why they don't do so is because they have concerns, primarily safety related concerns, or just kind of like, comfort feelings. It may not necessarily be a factor of like, oh, I'm going to get hit by a car, but just like, the thought of sharing space with a car can be unsettling for a lot of people. So while we can reach some people under our existing conditions, and we do see people out there walking and biking, there's a big segment of the population that would do so more if the conditions were more accommodating. Next slide. And so here we see kind of a vignette of what is kind of it's a relatable and common situation in a lot of parts of LA. We see here this young girl. She wants to go to a park to meet some friends, just pretty close by to where she lives. But her grandmother's concerned for her safety, getting there by bike. Similarly, the grandmother needs to go to the pharmacy, again, not too far away. But just walking there can be unsettling or a little bit harrowing, depending on time of day and circumstances and all that. So what we see here is that there's trips that either aren't being made or they're being made and they're uncomfortable. Next slide. And as part of this project, we've also been surveying Angelenos, and we've had a survey out there for quite a while, an online survey that we've been promoting with our consultant. And if we go to the next slide, it currently, I think at the last check-in, it had over 1,000 responses, but it certainly has over 800 responses. And when we reviewed a sampling of the responses there, we saw results that kind of mirrored some of this national research, in that there's a lot of interest in walking and biking, but the conditions have to be safe, comfortable, and convenient. And that's something that's currently lacking. Next slide. So, as part of LADOT, we have implemented bike lanes on busy streets, and these are shown to increase ridership and to reduce collisions and improve safety. So those are certainly welcome improvements. However, next slide. Just kind of echoing this research, what we see and what we learn is that residential streets with limited car traffic and slow moving car traffic can be more appealing just as a default, absent any infrastructure investments or with just kind of minor adjustments being made. So we have, a city with over 6,000 miles of streets. I think half of those are residential streets. And, in certain areas, there's big opportunity to promote more walking and biking through fairly minor interventions. Next slide. And there's a whole host of benefits that come along with having these kinds of low traffic streets. self-evident, but it's worth mentioning that low traffic streets tend to have less noise and air pollution. People tend to know their neighbors more, whether it's just by face or because people are more inclined to sit out on their porches and watch their neighbors walk by. There's kind of like a communal kind of atmosphere when you have a street that's kind of pleasant to be out on. And of course, streets with slower traffic tend to be safer and more accessible. Back to the previous slide.
All right. Yeah. Right.
So we've been talking about level of travel stress and how we're building on existing research. This picture kind of shows a snapshot of some of the ingredients that go into measuring level of travel stress. So everything from the posted speed limit to how wide a street is, intersection treatments, how many lanes of traffic are there, is there space for biking so that you can be separate from traffic if the speeds and volumes are high. And this is all kind of intuitive, but this kind of puts it in a nice visual kind of graphic format, as we see here. Next slide.
And Severin, you have about 8 minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done with my portion.
Great.
And now with respect to intersections, we score these, the level of travel stress at intersections differently from kind of the mid-block sections. And we see here kind of 4 different versions of level of travel stress at an intersection. In the top left, the one with the 4, this tends to be the highest stress kind of environment. You're on a residential street, and it might be a lovely experience, but as soon as you hit a major street, there's not really a safe or reliable way to cross the street. You have a stop sign figure for your street, but there's nothing to kind of stop the major street. So you're relying on a gap in the traffic. Technically, if you're walking, drivers are supposed to yield, but that doesn't always happen. A bit better than that might be as if there's a marked crosswalk. The crosswalk might even just be on one side of the street, not on both sides. And at least in that kind of a situation, it serves as a visual reminder of the right-of-way for a pedestrian and increases the chances that a car driver will yield when you wish to cross. Perhaps a bit better than that, in the lower left, in the box with the 2, there might be some kind of flashing beacon or some kind of lighted assist to that crosswalk, and that also helps increase yielding compliance to a greater degree. If you're biking, you can still kind of use this, but it relies on informal behavior, right? So there isn't necessarily a push button for somebody biking, but it's common practice for someone biking to go up to the curb cut, push the button, and then kind of walk or bike themselves across the intersection using the pedestrian crossing. In the lower right, what we consider to be kind of the most comfortable situation is you might have crosswalks on both sides of the street. In addition to the flashing device to help pedestrians, there might even be accommodations for people biking so that they can trigger that lighted flashing through a push button or some kind of loop detector, so that it doesn't rely on informal behavior anymore. And there's a formalized and reliable and safe way to cross a major street. And with that, I'll pass it back over to David.
All right. And then, so the next task we had is to prioritize, is to look at the map that we generated in according to the criteria that we've defined in terms of all these factors, street width, speed, crossing points, and found that we graded the neighborhood enhanced network according to the travel stress criteria and found that intersections are very common barriers and constraints that hold us back from really realizing a full stress-free or low-stress transportation network on neighborhood streets. These are very common themes that prevent and realize a full network. And then, so the next step was to identify, focus our lens further and identify intersections that really have high value in terms of satisfying a network connection, so that you're really realizing miles and miles and interconnecting networks. I think of them as more of like acupuncture points, where you're opening up all these opportunities from a single point intervention. So there were several factors that we had identified with our technical consultant, whether or not the network connects latent demand areas, satisfies a gap closure on existing low stress streets, creating long corridors from a single point intervention, leads to multiple network connections, and are they close to schools in need of safe routes, or leads to existing bicycle lanes. And this is an example of saying that, like, long corridor, you could see 4th Street performs very highly in terms of its overall continual length. That is a fairly low stress environment, with the exception of the 2 intersections, which would combine make 3.6 miles and combine entirely networks, both on either side of the country club area. You see networks coming in and connecting to that corridor. So there's a high potential there. It's also looking at gap closures of low stress streets that what otherwise is a low stress corridor, with the intersections there, and also connecting some of the latent demand areas that we had identified in our analysis. So really, I'm speaking through the analysis methodology that led us to select some of those intersections where we then were able to install pop-up surveys. And so that's what you've seen installed in the area that we've been talking about, that you may have noticed. Hopefully you've taken the survey. And we've installed 10 pop-up surveys so far throughout the area, pop-up posters. We installed them at each intersection. That included a link to a survey where we were collecting feedback from users of the corridor on their experience using the street, and whether they would support for potential design solutions. There was 3 pop-up posters located in the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council service area on 4th Street and Highland, 4th Street and Rossmore, and St. Andrews and Beverly Boulevard. Generally, we're seeking feedback from people who access the corridor. Does the intersection feel safe for people while they're crossing the street? How much travel stress would they experience? Can they just self-assess and see if that matches up with our validation criteria? And what are the solutions that would optimize, potentially optimize trade-offs that we could start thinking about to make that a more comfortable crossing? So we want to know if the intersection feels safe by those already walking and biking or otherwise accessing the street. That's why it was really optimal for us to install in place and let people just encounter that in the world, collecting that, local travel, and anybody that would be traveling on the corridor was really the goal in installing the surveys at those locations. We also asked about potential solutions that could be addressed, such as like adding a marked crosswalk. Crosswalks generally help encourage drivers to yield to people crossing the street. It could reduce pedestrian exposure to vehicles in an intersection by shortening crossing distances. So something that would generally perform better in terms of what we're understanding in terms of this criteria. Also, we asked about potential solutions that could provide greater protected movement for people on a bike or somebody that walks that wants to cross the street with. So this is a solution that's similar to a full signal, but it requires cars to turn right. So the intent by this type of design or solution would be to discourage cut-through traffic and foster lower car volumes overall on a corridor, as you're trying to more or less promote a traffic calm corridor for more of a pleasant experience, and that supports just that the population that we're really trying to attract to this way of getting around.
David,
so then, yep.
Thank
Am
you.
I out
Just
of time?
we are at 6 p.m. So if you can wrap it up, and then we will go to questions.
Yeah, I think that's, I definitely wanted to make sure that we got everything that led up to us placing the surveys where they are. We do have just like some next steps that we could talk about, like other activities, but they're not really central focus to this discussion. I could just talk about them maybe in a Q&A if there's other ways that people are interested in how we're just leveraging involvement to really provide feedback and analysis, and because there's other exercises as well in addition to these pop-up surveys that you've seen. But I could pause there and we could just go for the questions, Conrad. if
That
that's
sounds like a
preference.
good suggestion to take it up as part of the Q&A. So let me just remind everyone of the ground rules, that members of the committee and the board will be invited to speak for up to 2 minutes each, but I ask you to please hold to 1 minute and only ask 2 questions each maximum, and members of the public for 1 minute each. And I'm going to group these questions together, so maybe we'll get 3 people. If you can take good notes and then respond to all of them together, that will discourage a back and forth conversation, which will eat up time, precious time. And so if you would like to comment or ask a question and you are on a telephone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And if you are on the computer, look for that raise hand in your Zoom window and press it. And let's see, when your name is up, we will call you in order in which your hands are raised. And we will ask you to please clearly state your name for the record. So if everyone will please start raising your hands. And as chair, I'm going to just take the opportunity to ask 2 very basic questions. One is, what is the survey cutoff date? Assuming that maybe it's the same date for all 3 intersections. And are any bike lanes actually being proposed in Greater Wilshire as part of this stress-free connections project that you've described tonight?
Yeah, good question, Conrad. So as far as the overall survey cutoff date, there's not a precise date, but we would like to close out the survey in probably a little over a month from now. We're really trying, some locations we're really trying to keep the survey in place so that people actually encounter them. As you may be aware, we've had a little bit of a challenge on the 2 locations in 4th Street. We've had to replace those surveys 6 or 7 times because they've been taken down. So we do want to make sure that the surveys stay up long enough to be able to at least collect, meaningful feedback. But I would say, early summer is likely when we would conclude the survey gathering process. And then the second question,
the second question, thanks,
is on the bicycle lanes. There are no proposed bicycle lanes for the, well, I mean, we cover a pretty big service area, like the Central City subregion is.
But
big,
as part of what we're talking about tonight, are we talking about?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So for that question, no,
Great.
we're not.
Okay.
We're really looking at just really focused locations where we can make more spot adjustments that would help.
Wonderful. Understood. Just wanted to get that out of the way. I'm sorry to rush you. I just want to get to our attendees. So
no worries.
I see we have Gary, then Rory, then Liz. So I am allowing Gary to talk. Gary, if you can please unmute and make your comment and or ask your question.
Hi, my name is Gary Gilbert. I'm a new member of Neighborhood Council, and I have never seen the survey. So I had a question because I've been dealing with other surveys in terms of a possible bias in the survey. I wondered when you ask questions in the survey, whether they also talk about the consequences, something sort of like, if we do this, then yes, there might be traffic backed up. If we do this, then there might be other issues. Because I'm wondering whether the survey would be people just saying, hey, what do you think about this? And they're going to say, sure, I'm in favor of that. And I wonder whether they've also considered the consequences of what that would be.
Thank you, Gary. Let's go to the next question. So if you can make a note of that, please, David. The next question is from Rory Cunningham. Rory, please state your name for the record, and you are allowed to talk.
Hi, my name is Rory Cunningham, and I live in the St. Andrews Square Neighborhood Association. I noticed that you're proposing one of these intersections at St. Andrews and Beverly. This is actually the first I'm hearing of it. I'm assuming that this includes a new stoplight at that intersection. And I'm wondering if there's going to be adequate time for public discussion on this. As we had the same thing happen on the opposite side of our neighborhood with putting a light in, and all the neighbors at the time were very happy about it before they realized it just made basically a freeway for drivers to drive through our neighborhood and made traffic much worse and much more unsafe. Thanks.
Thank you, Rory. And our next question is from Liz. Liz, I am allowing you to talk.
Oh, thank you. I wish I had an unmute button with my husband at home, but thank you. I'm Liz Gabor. I'm co-president of the St. Andrews Square Neighborhood Association. I'm kind of just piggybacking on Rory's question. I too have only just been made aware of this. As far as a survey cutoff date, I also am just curious about the what effect the survey is going to have, because if the two presidents of a neighborhood association are only just finding out about it now, I'm just wondering how and if the folks in our neighborhood are going to have any say in whether or not, in particular, this intersection on St. Andrews and Beverly goes through or not. So my question is, if we don't like the idea, do we have the ability to say, yeah, enough people don't want it? So thank you for your best intentions, but.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on, Liz, finish, please finish. I inadvertently muted you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
I guess my question is, will the constituents or the neighbors in our neighborhood have a say in whether or not this treatment at the intersection of St. Andrews and Beverly moves forward? Is it, in other words, is it's moving forward contingent on whether or not the community supports or is opposed to it? That's my question.
Thank you, Liz. And again, my apologies for the technical gaffe there. Our next question after we hear some answers will be from John Vane. So please, presenters, take it away.
Yeah, and perhaps I can start here, and then of course, David and Severin, please feel free to chime in. I think just perhaps for all of the questions, I think this might help to kind of answer some of the discussion or the concerns that have been raised. I think anytime you're asking survey questions about conditions that don't exist yet, of course, I understand the concern, Gary, that you brought up. I guess, just to backtrack a little bit, we did follow all of LADOT's procedures around making surveys and the quality control assurance that is part of that. But I think we are, to get to the meat of your question, we are interested in following up with workshops or specific discussions around concerns. Those are often best identified, in forums like this, or forums, that are more personal, where you could talk about specific challenges and barriers. So I think the survey is just a starting off point. So I did want to mention that. And David, if you wanted to take the next part of that, I'll hand it off to you.
So just as far, there was, as Rubina was saying, we are essentially at a planning level stage where, we haven't committed to any sort of solution so far. There's definitely opportunities in the future where we would workshop. And I think that there's ways that we can get into, some of the concerns or, what was mentioned, unintended consequences, more in a workshop setting, because we could really delve into, I think what those underlying concerns and provide more support for from like our engineering staff and to really talk through some of those issues than we could through a survey. So a survey has very limited use in terms of just really delving out in all those details. But I think the intended for us is to provide just an overall snapshot of what is generally desired. Does it align with some of the analysis that we're seeing, and then so that that would just support our overall findings that would go to the next level of,
David, let me make sure, if I may, I just want to make sure that you're answering those direct questions. So one is, did the survey actually discuss the consequences? And then Rory's question was, does it include a new stoplight at St. Andrews and Beverly? And Liz's question is, will the constituents and the neighbors have a say?
Right. And so, well, for the stoplight, there's no stoplight there's no specific suggestion so far that we're not at the stage of proposing a stoplight. What we're actually looking at may not, just for the very reasons that were implied, just a full traffic signal may not really support the conditions that are trying to replicate for some of the reasons that have been I think Gary stated. The other question about the community involvement, we do have scope and opportunities for workshops when we get more into details. If we're providing specific recommendations, that we'd be better fleshing that out in more of a focused meeting format, so we can hear feedback and provide our response to questions, so that we can weigh the pros and cons a little more. And then, I'm sorry, Conrad, could you repeat there was I think it was maybe the first question I lost track of?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've touched on it, but it was, does the survey, if I understood correctly, does the survey actually discuss the consequences?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't, there are, the things that are suggested in terms of, would, it doesn't go into full detail of like, what would a crosswalk do? Because a crosswalk, it certainly supports certain things about getting across the street, but then, it doesn't always result in like full, stop compliance from cars. So these are things that we would want to talk through more in a workshop setting, so people really understand, sort of can weigh the pros and cons of a specific design or solution than what we'd be able to accomplish from a survey. We won't decide to approve any type of crossing treatment without that fuller discussion.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to turn now to John Vane. John, if you will just state your name for the record, please.
John Vane for the record.
Thank you.
Gary asked a question, and I think it was partially answered here, about the whether there was bias in the survey. And I have read the survey, and I have a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. As far as comments, I believe very strongly that the survey was very biased in a couple of regards. One is that it was anonymous. There was no obligation to say who you are. So it invites people who may not be stakeholders, but may have certain interests to comment. Also, there were leading questions like, how are we going to make these two intersections safe? Which presupposes that they're not. But if you look at the data, in over a decade, there were only 2 accidents, one in each of the intersections. Not one of them was with a cyclist, one was with a pedestrian, and neither were any meaningful injuries. So, and I can give a number of examples, but I believe very firmly that the survey was biased and ignored the data. The questions that I have, one is, were traffic studies done? And in particular on Highland, it's required by law that if you're going to make any changes, that were there any traffic studies done? The other is more macro question, which is, what are we solving for here? Are we solving for getting people, because I'm all in favor of getting rid of cars, but for what purpose? Is this for leisure? Is this for shopping, or is this for getting people to work? Because that would require a lot of data that I don't know if folks have access to. So for example, if you're looking to get people to work, have you done an analysis on which people are going to be getting where for work? Because one of the problems we have in Los Angeles is there's not a lot of affordable housings. And so a lot of the people who may be willing to bike may not be the same people who would be using these thoroughfares that we're putting in.
10 seconds, John.
All right, in terms of shopping, the reality is a bike can only carry so much stuff. So it seems to me that shopping can't be, it seems to me the only real reason for this is leisure, because I don't think you're going to solve a work problem. I don't think you're going to solve a shopping problem. I wish you could,
John, let's see what they have to say.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your question. Presenters, I don't see any other hands up right now, so why don't you take that one?
Yeah, a lot there. I mean, the survey questions, we didn't ask for people's names, but we did ask for their email address and we asked for their zip code and where they lived. I mean, I think that's relevant information for us just to really understand how people are kind of weighting the value of the type of solutions that are being solved. So that's something that does provide at least a snapshot of it. As far as looking at safety and collisions, I mean, this goes into like the overall program goals. You know, Vision Zero is a program that is looking at where the preponderance of collisions are and coming up with engineering solutions to make those, to reduce those collisions by making that street just more operationally safe. This is an entirely different program where we're trying to make the environment safer for people that don't currently make those choices today to get around by biking and walking. So the people that, you know, could potentially bike more to the office. And we have seen that in a pandemic. You know, people have opted to, you know, there has been an uptick in bicycling and people purchasing bikes, mostly probably coming from a lot of transit riders, but still there's a high level of interest in it. And the modeling data does show us some insight. The modeling data does include all those trip types in terms of home to work trip types. That is in our travel demand forecasting model, and that's what's, you know, highlighting those areas in terms of where people are going to and from. You know, shopping trips are you know, I think you've highlighted that there are some challenges there, but I do, you know, there are, you know, more or less, you know, people can, I guess, like purchase a cargo bike and make a shopping trip. But I do think that by and large, when we think of journeys, it could be, you know, work-based and also leisure, recreational as well. But that is coming from modeling data. We get that from the National Household Travel Survey, you know, underlying sources for that. So so yeah, I mean, the overall goal is to you know, make these neighborhood streets function really like, you know, bicycle networks and corridors, so more people are doing it. We've looked at other cities that have done a similar approach. I mean, I know that sometimes we get, you know, we look at the experience of Amsterdam in the 70s, where they didn't really have a bicycle network. Imagine at one point they really didn't, and they really solved this exercise of solving these like network barriers, and they just saw, you know, blossoming of riders after they really started to make comfortable journeys from point A to B. So you know, that is the overall intent. And then what is let's see,
David, I think
did I go through? I'm trying to see.
I don't know if you answered to the satisfaction of the asker, but we have 3 hands up, and
Right.
noting we only have shortly over 10 minutes left. So the hands were in this order: Jonah Bliss, I'm going to unmute you, and then we will go to Mary Sheehan and then Philip Farha, and that may be it for tonight. So Jonah, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Conrad. And thank you from everyone from the LADOT for your time and work on this. I was wondering if someone could maybe speak to, and I think this might alleviate some of my colleagues and constituents' concerns, A, if you guys are studying, and B, what the implementation is like for you know, traffic infrastructure that basically allows for bicycle through traffic while discouraging vehicular cut through traffic.
Okay, so hold on to that question, guys. Let's go to Mary. Mary, I am allowing you to talk. Please make your comment and/or question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, and if you'll state your name for the record, please.
Yeah, this is Mary Sheehan Rajwing, and I have a comment and a question. I live on Wilton Place, not at the level of Beverly. But we've recently had some traffic mitigation measures painted on our streets, and I'd like to suggest that more rules is going to require more enforcement, because it might seem obvious that, well, there's that big arrow that says you have to turn this way or you can't go out of the right-hand turn lane, but people do it all the time, despite how many signs and paintings, markings on the street. My question is, have you looked at least the St. Andrews Beverly in relation to Wilton and Beverly, which is a very gnarly and dangerous intersection, which is 2.5 blocks west of what you're suggesting at St. Andrews?
All right, if you can, if our presenters will hold those questions, we now have Philip Farha. Philip, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Philip Farha here. Just quickly, I was wondering if there's been any effort to quantify or study the effects or anticipated effects of the pandemic, really, and of working from home on traffic as part of the study.
All right, so we have 3 questions. The first one is from Jonah. Are you studying, and what, if so, what implementations for traffic infrastructure, et cetera? Please.
Yeah, so on there are specific solutions that have become popular just in the last few years that would, by an effect, make it more permissive and stop traffic for people that are biking and walking across the street, but then not be permissive for vehicles. So the image in the survey was actually from an existing intersection that was where we recently installed what we call a toucan, which is a bicycle signal and a walk signal that has the same timing. Two can cross at the same time. And,
David, maybe you can pull up that slide just to give the visual.
Yeah, that's a good. Let's see. Yep, there we are. So you can't see it really at this resolution, but that's not a normal signal head that actually has a bicycle signal in it when it's green. It means only it's permissive through for only the bicycle, and that the street, which is at I think Rosewood, it requires a right turn where this I think was I don't know if that replaced a full signal or if it was just stop control, but that through movement is no longer permitted at the intersection. So it's filtering, pedestrian and bicycles. They get the full stop control of the cross traffic, which is really what's needed to create a protective environment. It's much more better compliance than just like a crosswalk. A crosswalk with the indicated RFB is a little bit better, but this is really that full protected environment for bicyclists and walking, yet it does not encourage the through movement of vehicles. It's shown to be attractive for people that are also concerned about the cut through. So what was discussed before with maybe the neighborhood traffic, I'm not familiar with that specific instance, but where full signals have been installed, some people want that for the local access, but then when they realize that that creates an incentive for people to use the corridor, and that actually makes the conditions a little worse for people that are traveling a corridor on biking or whatnot, because there's higher volumes of vehicles that they're in the mix, and not the best environment. But then there's trade-offs there. So that definitely is possible and becoming much more available innovation. The question about the recent traffic mitigation on Wilton, it looks like there may be some enforcement issues and about people not complying with signage. I'm not exactly sure what the scenario there, but they're certainly something that could be probably explored through our district office. And then
I think the question is, if you are proposing new mitigations and you have this scofflaw behavior, how do you address that in your planning?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's also goes into the analysis as well. So once you start looking at the potential traffic solutions, which could be, say, a marked crosswalk. It could be, like some type of modified signal. There's a lot of research that has gone into its compliance. So how well do cars, stop at that light, or so that's already in the I think the decision criteria of whether or not to install a feature, because you don't want to put a marked crosswalk where you may not be able to get full stop compliance very often and that's why we generally avoid putting marked crosswalks without the accompaniment of some type of detection that alerts the vehicle as that what their expectations are supposed to be.
And am I correct that the bollards in the picture that you're showing are actually a result of people not obeying the painted markings?
I think in this circumstance, they more or less predicted that, and that was seen to be necessary. I think from our engineers thought that the cars would end up not following the signage, and so yes, the bollards were seen to be necessary to provide further compliance, just to provide that physical obstruction. I think that's something that could be certainly in the mix when we look at similar solutions. That's very common now for us to protect areas like that to encourage greater vehicle compliance.
And
bollards are also especially helpful for nighttime reflection. So often it's just an added level of visibility at nighttime.
Sure. Yeah, I recall from past conversations or discussions of the subject that the bollards were not part of the original idea, but I didn't want to deviate and spend a lot of time talking about the bollards. Just want to make sure, Mary asked if you'd looked at St. Andrews and Beverly in relation to Wilton and Beverly 2.5 blocks west. And I'm not sure specifically, maybe I can just ask Mary to please clarify exactly whether that question has been answered.
Well, it's a huge volume of traffic going north, south, east, west, and it's there's an apartment building on 3 corners. There's a lot of traffic. There's left turns, right turns. It's dangerous and high volume. I just want to know how you're taking that into consideration with the project that you're looking at St. Andrews. They're going to come to a screeching halt pretty quickly, or they're going to go through the light and cause problems.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing just to keep in mind from what we're focused on is implementing solutions on what we've defined as the neighborhood enhanced network. They're a subset of neighborhood streets that are in the mobility plan. So they're not all encompassing like every street that would be in the mix. Now, there could be a need for some type of solution at that location that could be met, in some parallel analysis. Maybe, we used to have a more involved traffic management program. If we have, kinder budget years, that could be something that is better staffed, and that could be, but I think ultimately it's probably something that at least needs to be looked at from our district engineering office.
Okay, let's go to Philip's question, if we might, because we're just coming up on 6:30. So Philip's question was about any effort to quantify the pandemic and the effects on work from home, or the effects of work from home on traffic.
I'm going to kick this question over to my Rubina, you want to take
that? Yeah, I'm happy to. Yes, we do have an article that I'd be more than happy to share. I just don't have a chat function here, but perhaps I can email it to you, Conrad, for emailing out.
We can place that in the committee docs. That's
Okay.
greaterwilshire.org/TC docs, and that's listed on our agenda. Please continue.
Yeah, and yes, so we did conduct a study in analyzing travel behavior as a result of COVID and travel trends, really. So looking at this over the course of a couple of different months. And there's a couple of, I think, just key findings that I know we're really short on time, but just to summarize this, and you all can dive deeper later at your leisure. But I think just trips did continue happening, including transit trips, even in the very beginning months of COVID, knowing that there were many essential workers making essential trips. Of course, volumes were down during that time. Since I think we've seen that those trends have changed a little bit in the more recent months. But at the very beginning of COVID, volumes were down, with the exception of people living in overwhelmingly in more lower income parts of the city, and overwhelmingly people of color or communities of color. We're continuing to make trips, and often longer trips. So that's an indication of course, possibly essential workers traveling to work, as well as trips to grocery stores and perhaps communities that don't have the same or equal access to groceries and other essential services, medical services, perhaps.
I do have two more hands and of folks that have not spoken yet. So I'm going to ask Tucker and then Jill to just quickly ask your questions. We're going to cut it off at 6:35. So Tucker, please go ahead.
Hey guys, first of all, thank you for doing this. This was very informative. Just listening, I didn't think I had any questions at first, but listening, particularly when you got to this slide at La Brea and Rosewood, I was just reminded of something, which is, when something like this came up before, pre-pandemic, at the Highland and Rossmore locations, I believe it was Hancock Park Homeowners Association that sent out this very scary email with suppositions of how traffic and cut-through traffic would increase if this sort of thing was put in.
If you can get to your question, that would be
I
great.
am, I have it, which created a lot of questions about that. And you've had a lot of time now with this Rosewood La Brea location. And I'm wondering, has there been a traffic study to see if cut-through traffic in neighboring streets has increased or decreased with the installation of this? Because having that information, I know you're about to get a lot of pushback again, as you heard John already.
I think we've heard your question.
Last question. No, you have not. Last question is, Rory mentioned before the increased cut-through at St. Andrews and something, but he didn't say what it was. And I'd like to know if that was this sort of installation or if it was just a regular light.
Okay, great. I'm not sure they can answer the second one because they're talking about a project that hasn't been done yet. But why don't you go ahead and answer that, and then we'll get Jill's question. Thanks, Tucker. Presenters, if you can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So with respect to the Rosewood and La Brea intersection, there has been some kind of cursory analysis, which has shown an increase in bicycle ridership. And as far as I know, at least no increase in cut-through traffic along Rosewood as it relates to that. But there hasn't been kind of like a full-on kind of in-depth analysis, but it's certainly something that we can and should look to as we consider this treatment at other locations throughout the city, and not just as part of this project.
Great. It looks like Jill lowered her hand. Jill, did you still have a question? I'm going to allow you to talk in case you still wanted to ask it. Okay, it looks like Jill didn't have a question. So Gary's already spoken, but we'll give him the last question here. Gary, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First one is piggybacking on what Mary had said. As someone who's ridden bikes on 4th Street often, pretty much anytime there's been danger, I felt danger, it has to do with cars not paying attention and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I was wondering in general, whether there are any studies done on whether when you make some changes in order to help bikers and give bikers right-of-ways, it ends up backfiring where they end up being more dangerous because the bikers feel confidence that they could go when in fact there is danger. So that's part one. And the second question, totally unrelated, in a situation like this, after the surveys and after the workshops, who is it who actually decides whether or not to install a light or something on the corner? Is it an individual or a team? And does that have to get approved by the mayor, by the city council, or anyone else?
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
And that's our last question. Please, presenters.
Right. So as far as the studies concerned with looking at as far as like bicyclists, it was basically a bicyclist crossing and then having an expectation that they're safe and they're not. There has been older studies done about unmarked or marked crosswalks that aren't signalized, providing some level of what they call like false expectation of safety. There's been a lot of disputes about that research. There's been research that kind of goes both ways, but general guidance is that you should do a little bit more than just a marked crosswalk. It should have some sort of signal detection that alerts drivers that what their expectations are. Overall, though, there has been research that generally shows as bicycling goes up, drivers pay more attention, because now that there's something in the roadway that they tend to see more on a more regular basis that forces them to pay attention. And that's where you tend to see more distracted driving, more collisions in cities that just don't have safe environments for bicycle travel. And lo and behold, nobody's traveling. There's no reason to pay attention. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. As you create environments and you nurture environments through infrastructure that people feel more comfortable in, it's kind of a virtuous cycle of having a feedback and helping to tame the driving behavior. So that there is a preponderance of research there. And then the second question is about the approval. The general manager of the Department of Transportation has the authority to approve traffic control devices to achieve safety and efficiency of the transportation system. That's the authority straight out of the Los Angeles Municipal Code. Decisions do reside with LADOT. Clearly, the LADOT and our general manager are responsive to the mayor. There's always a lot of discretion and given to the preferences of the council office, and oftentimes more so than. So the mayor and the council definitely have a lot of important decision weight on that decision, but the final authority is the general manager of the Department of Transportation to make the approval.
Thank you, David. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to show people how they can find the information that you will be providing, the article from Ms. Ghazarian. And hopefully I'm going to share the right one. Fingers crossed. Okay, good. So this is what you will see if you go to greaterwilshire.org/TC docs. It'll be at that link for a little while. And that will include PDFs of the surveys that we've been talking about tonight, as well as a flyer that you provided previously and an email from you. And I think, that email does include, oh, I'm sorry, it does not include your email. It includes your email address, David. I believe you want them to contact you at the stressfreeconnections@lacity.org. Is that right?
That would be best, just so that all the emails are consolidated in one place.
Okay.
Just organizationally, that would be best. They could certainly email me or Severin as well, and we'll make sure that they're all retained in our files. Okay. And you have that email as well.
Yes, and all of the links are within your email here. So if they want to click on the links, they can find them there.
They also, if you look on the LADOT Stress Free Connections PDF, the email should also be on the bottom of the fact sheet or flyer.
Oh, you're right. Perfect.
Stress Free Connections, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Video of this be made available to others?
Yes, thank you for the reminder, Tucker. Yeah, we will be uploading this to our YouTube channel, and I will put the link on our website so people can check it out and share that with their fellow community members. So thank you so much. We ran a little bit over. Hopefully that was worth everyone's while. I'd like to thank our committee members of the Transportation Committee and our many stakeholders who came out tonight, as well as our 3 presenters from the LA Department of Transportation. It's now 6:40 p.m. and I will ask for unanimous consent from our committee members to adjourn this special meeting of the Transportation Committee.
Conrad, can I ask a quick question, or at least make a 20-second point? Sev made a comment about Rosewood, but my comment is I'd like to see that there was before and after data, because when he said there's no more cut through traffic, I think that that was at best a supposition without any data to support it. And if there is, I would love to see it, because I'd
John,
love to see.
yes, I heard that as anecdotal as well. And sorry to cut you off, but I don't want to launch back into a
Okay.
discussion. But
But it
let's
just shows a bias.
yeah,
Okay, thanks.
let's continue the conversation directly with the DOT folks and at the Transportation Committee. So thanks again, everyone. It's 6:41, and I will call this meeting I will adjourn this meeting at this time with no objection from our committee members. And I'm hearing none. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
It's my
Thank you
pleasure.
for your time.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Conrad.